The night air in Damascus carries secrets that have been whispered for 13 centuries. I stand in the courtyard of the great Umayyad Mosque, surrounded by columns of marble that seem to glow with their own inner light. The jasmine blooms in the garden beyond the walls, their fragrance mixing with the faint scent of frankincense that still lingers from the evening prayers. Above me, the stars shine with the same brilliance that once illuminated the palaces of the first Islamic emperors, the Umayyad Caliphs who transformed a desert faith into a world-spanning civilization. The stones beneath my feet are worn smooth by the footsteps of countless pilgrims, merchants, scholars, and dreamers who have walked these paths over the centuries. Each stone holds within it the memory of voices that once echoed through these halls. The deep, resonant tones of Caliph Muawiyah as he held court, the gentle whispers of poets reciting verses about love and eternity, the urgent consultations of generals planning campaigns that would carry the banner of Islam from the banks of the Indus to the shores of the Atlantic. Damascus in the 7th century was not yet the jewel of Islamic civilization it would become, but it possessed something that caught the eye of Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan when he chose it as his capital. The city sat at the crossroads of the ancient world, where the trade routes from Persia met the paths from Byzantine Constantinople, where the caravans from the Indian Ocean ports crossed the highways that led to the markets of the Mediterranean. It was a place where cultures had mingled for millennia, where the architectural traditions of Rome and Byzantium had merged with the artistic sensibilities of the Persian Empire and the nomadic aesthetics of the Arab tribes. The transformation began slowly, almost imperceptibly. When Muawiyah first established his court here in 661, he inherited a city that was already old when the Prophet Muhammad was born. The Romans had built here, the Byzantines had ruled here, the Persians had conquered here. But the Umayyads would do something different. They would create here a new form of Islamic civilization that was neither purely Arab nor purely Persian, neither wholly traditional nor completely innovative, but something entirely new. I close my eyes and let my imagination carry me back to those first days, when the sound of construction echoed through the Damascus streets as the new caliphs began to build their capital. The workshops hummed with activity as craftsmen from across the known world came to contribute their skills to the great project. Byzantine mosaicists worked alongside Persian carpet weavers, Arab poets collaborated with Greek scholars, and Jewish merchants conducted business with Christian artisans, all under the unifying banner of the Umayyad state. The mosque that surrounds me now is not the original structure that Muawiyah knew, but it stands on the same sacred ground where the first Umayyad rulers came to pray. The current building, with its soaring minarets and glittering mosaics, was built by Al-Walid ibn Abd al-Malik in the early 8th century, but it embodies the vision that Muawiyah had for his new capital, a place where the spiritual and temporal power of Islam could be displayed in all its glory. The mosaics that adorn the walls seem to come alive in the moonlight, their golden tessellé catching and reflecting the starlight in patterns that shift and dance with each passing cloud. These are not mere decorations but theological statements, artistic expressions of the Islamic understanding of paradise. The artists who created them, many of them Byzantine craftsmen who had worked on the great churches of Constantinople, adapted their techniques to serve a new faith, creating images of gardens and palaces that spoke to the Muslim soul without violating the prohibition against representational art. The trees in these mosaics are not any earthly trees but the trees of paradise, their branches heavy with fruit that never rots, their leaves shimmering with colors that do not exist in nature. The rivers that flow through these artistic gardens are the rivers of eternity, their waters crystal clear and eternally refreshing. The palaces that gleam in the background are not the palaces of earthly kings but the mansions that await the faithful in the afterlife. Walking through the prayer hall, I can almost hear the whispers of the thousands of worshippers who have prostrated themselves on these marble floors over the centuries. The mihrab, the niche that indicates the direction of prayer toward Mecca, is carved with such delicate precision that it seems to draw the eye and the heart toward the sacred city hundreds of miles to the south. The minbar, the pulpit from which the imam delivers his sermons, is adorned with geometric patterns that speak of the mathematical precision underlying all of creation. The geometric patterns that decorate every surface of the mosque are not random designs but sophisticated mathematical expressions of Islamic theology. Each pattern begins with a simple shape, a circle, a square, a triangle, and then expands through careful repetition and transformation into complex designs that can theoretically extend infinitely in all directions. These patterns speak to the Islamic understanding of the divine as both unity and multiplicity, as the source of all creation and the destination toward which all creation moves. The calligraphy that flows across the walls and columns is perhaps the most distinctly Islamic of all the arts practiced in the mosque. The Arabic script, with its flowing curves and bold vertical strokes, transforms the words of the Quran into visual poetry. The calligraphers who worked on these inscriptions were not merely skilled technicians but spiritual practitioners who understood that the act of writing the sacred text was itself a form of worship. Each letter is formed with loving care, each word balanced with mathematical precision, each verse flowing into the next with the rhythm of sacred music. The light that fills the mosque comes not only from the oil lamps that burn throughout the night but from the spiritual radiance that seems to emanate from the very stones themselves. This is a place where the boundary between the earthly and the heavenly becomes thin, where the faithful can sense the presence of the divine in every breath, every heartbeat, every moment of stillness and prayer. As I walk through these sacred spaces, I begin to understand how the Umayyad Caliphs could have conceived of ruling an empire that stretched from Spain to Central Asia. This mosque, with its perfect proportions and infinite patterns, is a microcosm of the Islamic world they sought to create, a world where diversity and unity could coexist, where the local and the universal could be harmonized, where the temporal and the eternal could be experienced simultaneously. The night air stirs the hanging lamps, creating patterns of light and shadow that dance across the marble floors. In these shifting patterns, I can see the reflection of the great historical forces that shaped the Umayyad period, the tension between the Arab tribal traditions and the cosmopolitan demands of imperial rule, the balance between religious orthodoxy and political pragmatism, the challenge of maintaining unity across vast distances and diverse populations. The Umayyad Caliphs understood that ruling an empire required more than military might or administrative efficiency. It required the creation of a cultural and spiritual vision that could inspire loyalty and devotion across the known world. The mosque that surrounds me is evidence of their success in this endeavor, a building that speaks to the deepest aspirations of the human heart while serving the practical needs of a growing religious community. The architectural innovations that the Umayyads introduced to Islamic design would influence mosque construction for centuries to come. The use of the horseshoe arch, borrowed from Visigothic architecture in Spain, would become a hallmark of Islamic building. The incorporation of Byzantine decorative techniques would lead to the development of distinctly Islamic artistic styles. The emphasis on geometric patterns and calligraphic decoration would establish principles that would guide Islamic art through all its subsequent developments. But perhaps the most significant innovation was the creation of an architectural vocabulary that could be adapted to local conditions while maintaining its essential Islamic character. The Umayyad architects understood that Islamic civilization would need to be flexible enough to accommodate the diverse cultural traditions of the empire while strong enough to maintain its distinctive identity. The mosque in Damascus provided the prototype for this adaptability, a building that was unmistakably Islamic while incorporating elements from the pre-Islamic architectural traditions of Syria. The courtyard of the mosque, surrounded by its double-tiered arcade, creates a space that is both intimate and grand, both earthly and heavenly. The fountain at its center, fed by springs that have flowed since ancient times, provides not only practical facilities for ritual purification, but also a symbolic representation of the divine mercy that flows endlessly to refresh the souls of the faithful. The sound of the water, gurgling softly in the marble basin, creates a counterpoint to the silence of the night, a gentle reminder that even in the deepest quiet, life continues to flow and renew itself. The minaret that rises above the mosque, its square form a departure from the round towers of earlier Islamic architecture, stands as a beacon visible from miles away. Its height allows the call to prayer to be heard throughout the city, but its symbolic significance extends far beyond its practical function. The minaret is a finger pointing toward heaven, a reminder that the earthly city of Damascus is connected to the heavenly city of divine promise. Its four sides face the four directions of the compass, symbolizing the universal nature of the Islamic message and the global ambitions of the Umayyad Caliphate. Standing in the shadow of this minaret, I can imagine the first muezzin climbing its stairs in the early morning hours, preparing to call the faithful to prayer as the sun rises over the Syrian desert. His voice, trained in the art of Quranic recitation, would carry across the awakening city, reminding the merchants and craftsmen, the scholars and soldiers, the nobles and servants that their daily activities were part of a larger spiritual journey. The call to prayer in the Umayyad period was not merely a religious obligation but a declaration of identity and purpose. It announced to the world that this was an Islamic city, ruled by Islamic principles, dedicated to Islamic ideals. But it also served as a reminder to the Muslim community that their success in this world was meaningless without attention to their spiritual development and their relationship with the divine. The Umayyad caliphs understood this balance between worldly achievement and spiritual authenticity. They built palaces and mosques, conquered territories and established trade routes, patronized poets and scholars, but they also maintained the religious practices that had been established by the Prophet Muhammad and his immediate successors. The mosque in Damascus served as the center of this balance, a place where the caliph could demonstrate his piety while also displaying his power, where the community could gather for worship while also conducting the business of the empire. The night deepens around me, and the sounds of the modern city fade into the distance. In this sacred space, time seems to collapse, and I can feel the presence of all those who have prayed here over the centuries. The Umayyad caliphs with their flowing robes and ceremonial daggers, the scholars with their books and scrolls, the merchants with their tales of distant lands, the pilgrims with their hopes and fears, the children learning their first verses of the Quran, the elderly preparing for their final journey to the next world. Each generation has added its own layer to the spiritual atmosphere of this place, creating a depth of meaning that cannot be captured in words alone. The mosque is not just a building but a living repository of Islamic civilization, a place where the past and present converge in the timeless act of worship. The whispers of 13 centuries of prayers seem to echo in the night air, creating a symphony of devotion that transcends the boundaries of time and space. As I prepare to leave the mosque and continue my journey through the streets of Damascus, I carry with me the sense of peace and purpose that this sacred space has instilled in my heart. The Umayyad caliphs may have passed into history, their palaces may have crumbled, their empire may have fallen, but the spiritual legacy they created continues to inspire and guide those who seek to understand the deeper meaning of Islamic civilization. The stars above Damascus shine with the same light that illuminated the dreams of Muawiyah and his successors, the same light that guided the Arab armies across the deserts of Africa and the mountains of Asia, the same light that inspired the poets and artists and scholars who created the golden age of Islamic culture. In this light, I can see not just the history of what was, but the promise of what might yet be. The eternal potential of human civilization to create beauty and meaning in a world that often seems dominated by conflict and confusion. Part 2. The Rise of Muawiyah, Foundation of a Dynasty. Target. -25,000 characters. The whispers of the desert wind carry me back through the centuries to a time when Damascus was not yet the jewel of Islamic civilization but a provincial Byzantine city caught between competing empires. The year is 661, and the Islamic world stands at a crossroads. The fourth caliph, Ali ibn Abi Talib, has been assassinated in the Mosque of Kufa, and the young Muslim community faces a crisis of leadership that threatens to tear apart the unity forged by the Prophet Muhammad and his immediate successors. In the governor's palace in Damascus, a man of extraordinary vision prepares to assume the mantle of leadership that will transform not only his own destiny, but the fate of half the known world. Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan is not a man cut from the same cloth as the previous caliphs. He is not a close companion of the Prophet, not a member of the earliest Muslim community, not a man whose piety is unquestioned by all. He is, instead, a pragmatist, a politician, a master of the art of governance who understands that ruling an empire requires different skills than leading a religious movement. The moonlight filters through the latticed windows of the palace, casting intricate patterns on the marble floor where Muawiyah sits in contemplation. He is a man of middle years, his beard touched with silver, his eyes holding the calm confidence of one who has spent decades navigating the treacherous waters of tribal politics and imperial administration. The weight of his decision presses upon him like the heat of the Syrian sun, but his resolve is as steady as the mountains that surround his city. Muawiyah's path to power has been neither straight nor simple. Born into the Umayyad clan of the Quraysh tribe, he grew up in the shadow of the Kaaba in Mecca, but his family's initial opposition to Muhammad's prophetic mission marked him as an outsider in the earliest Muslim community. It was only after the conquest of Mecca in 630 that the Umayyads accepted Islam, and even then, their conversion was viewed with suspicion by many of the Prophet's original followers. But Muawiyah possessed qualities that his critics could not deny. He was intelligent, articulate, and possessed of a natural charisma that drew people to him. More importantly, he understood the complexities of governing diverse populations and managing the practical challenges of administration. When the second caliph, Umar ibn al-Khattab, appointed him governor of Syria in 639, Muawiyah transformed the province from a recently conquered territory into a model of efficient Islamic governance. The soft sound of water flowing in the palace fountain creates a gentle rhythm that seems to echo the steady progression of Muawiyah's rise to power. During his 20-year tenure as governor of Syria, he had demonstrated an ability to balance the demands of Islamic law with the practical necessities of governing a diverse population. Christians, Jews, and Muslims lived together in relative harmony under his rule, each community contributing to the prosperity of the province while maintaining their distinct identities. Muawiyah's administrative innovations would become the foundation of Umayyad governmental practice. He established a sophisticated bureaucracy that could handle the complex tasks of taxation, record-keeping, and correspondence across vast distances. He created a postal system that allowed for rapid communication between Damascus and the far-flung provinces of the growing Islamic Empire. Most importantly, he built the first Islamic navy, recognizing that control of the Mediterranean Sea was essential for the security and prosperity of the Muslim state. The decision to build a navy was perhaps the most visionary of Muawiyah's early innovations. The Arab tribes had been primarily land-based people, with little experience of maritime warfare or naval construction. But Muawiyah understood that the Byzantine Empire's control of the sea posed a constant threat to the Islamic territories along the Mediterranean coast. Working with skilled shipbuilders from the Christian and Jewish communities of Syria, he created a fleet that could challenge Byzantine naval supremacy and protect the growing Islamic Empire from seaborne attacks. The first Islamic naval victory came in 655 at the Battle of the Masts, when Muawiyah's fleet defeated a much larger Byzantine force near the coast of Asia Minor. The victory was not just a military triumph but a psychological breakthrough that demonstrated to the Islamic world that the Arabs could master any domain, whether on land or sea. The confidence gained from this victory would fuel the later Umayyad conquests in North Africa and Spain, opening new horizons for Islamic expansion. But Muawiyah's greatest challenge came not from external enemies but from within the Islamic community itself. The assassination of the third caliph, Uthman ibn Affan, in 656 had plunged the Muslim world into civil war. Ali ibn Abi Talib, the Prophet's cousin and son-in-law, had been chosen as the fourth caliph, but his authority was contested by several powerful factions, including Muawiyah and the other Umayyad leaders who demanded justice for Uthman's murder. The civil war that followed, known to history as the First Fitna, was a traumatic experience for the early Islamic community. For the first time, Muslims were fighting Muslims, brother against brother, all claiming to represent the true path of Islam. The conflict was not merely about political power but about the very nature of Islamic governance and the qualifications required for leadership of the Muslim community. Muawiyah's position in this conflict was complex and carefully calculated. He did not initially claim the caliphate for himself but demanded that Ali bring Uthman's murderers to justice. When Ali proved unable or unwilling to do so, Muawiyah positioned himself as the defender of justice and the rightful heir to Uthman's legacy. This stance allowed him to build a coalition of supporters while avoiding the appearance of naked ambition. The decisive moment in the conflict came at the Battle of Siffin in 657, when Muawiyah's forces faced Ali's army on the banks of the Euphrates River. The battle raged for days with heavy casualties on both sides, but neither army could achieve a decisive victory. As the fighting reached its climax, Muawiyah's forces raised copies of the Quran on their spears, calling for arbitration according to Islamic law rather than continued bloodshed. The arbitration that followed was a masterpiece of political maneuvering by Muawiyah. While Ali's supporters expected the arbitrators to confirm their leader's legitimacy, Muawiyah's representatives argued that the caliphate was vacant and that a new leader should be chosen. The arbitration ended inconclusively, but it achieved Muawiyah's primary objective of undermining Ali's authority and establishing himself as an alternative claimant to the caliphate. The final act of the first fitna came with Ali's assassination in 661. A member of the Kharijite sect, a radical group that had broken with both Ali and Muawiyah, struck down the fourth caliph as he was entering the mosque in Kufa for morning prayers. With Ali's death, the path to power lay open for Muawiyah, who was proclaimed caliph by his supporters in Damascus and gradually gained recognition from the other provinces of the Islamic Empire. The night air in the palace carries the scent of jasmine and orange blossoms, a reminder of the garden paradise that Islamic civilization would create in the lands it conquered. Muawiyah's assumption of the caliphate marked the beginning of a new era in Islamic history, one in which the religious community founded by the Prophet Muhammad would be transformed into a world empire capable of challenging the greatest powers of the age. The transformation began with Muawiyah's understanding that the Islamic State needed to adapt to the realities of governing a vast and diverse empire. The simple administrative structures that had served the early Muslim community in Medina were inadequate for managing territories that stretched from Egypt to Iran. Muawiyah began the process of creating a sophisticated governmental apparatus that could handle the complex tasks of imperial administration. The establishment of the Umayyad court in Damascus represented a dramatic departure from the austere style of the early caliphs. Where the first four caliphs had lived simply, in houses that were barely distinguishable from those of their subjects, Muawiyah created a court that could compete with the magnificence of the Byzantine and Persian imperial courts. The palace in Damascus became a center of power and culture, where poets and scholars, ambassadors and generals, merchants and artisans gathered to conduct the business of the empire. The court ceremonial that Muawiyah established drew on the traditions of the pre-Islamic Arabian tribes, but it also incorporated elements from the Byzantine and Persian imperial traditions. The caliph was surrounded by a hierarchy of officials and advisors, each with specific roles and responsibilities. The daily routine of the court followed elaborate protocols that emphasized the dignity and authority of the caliph while creating opportunities for petitioners to present their cases and for the administration to conduct its business. Muawiyah's approach to governance was characterized by a combination of firmness and flexibility that would become the hallmark of Umayyad rule. He understood that the Islamic Empire contained numerous ethnic groups, religious communities, and regional traditions that could not be simply eliminated or ignored. Instead, he sought to create a system that could accommodate this diversity while maintaining the essential unity of the Islamic State. The administrative language of the Umayyad state remained Arabic, the language of the Quran and the Prophet Muhammad, but Muawiyah was careful to employ skilled administrators from all the ethnic groups within the empire. Christians and Jews, Persians and Berbers, Copts and Syrians all found places in the Umayyad administration, bringing their expertise and knowledge to the service of the Islamic State. This inclusive approach helped to create a sense of shared investment in the success of the empire while providing the caliphate with access to the best administrative talent available. The economic policies of the Umayyad state reflected Muawiyah's understanding of the importance of trade and commerce in sustaining imperial power. Damascus's position at the crossroads of the ancient world made it a natural center for commercial activity, and Muawiyah worked to create conditions that would encourage trade and economic growth. He standardized weights and measures, improved roads and communications, and established a stable currency that could be used throughout the empire. The Umayyad gold dinar and silver dirham became the standard currencies of the Islamic world, replacing the Byzantine and Persian coins that had previously circulated in the conquered territories. The new coins bore inscriptions in Arabic rather than Greek or Persian, marking them as distinctly Islamic while maintaining the purity and weight standards that made them acceptable to merchants throughout the known world. Muawiyah's military policies were equally innovative. He understood that the Islamic Empire's security depended not only on the quality of its armies but on their ability to respond rapidly to threats on multiple frontiers. He established a system of military districts, each governed by a commander who was responsible for both the defense of his territory and the conduct of offensive operations when ordered by the caliph. The Umayyad military machine was built around the concept of the professional soldier rather than the tribal warrior. While the early Islamic conquests had been carried out primarily by Arab tribesmen fighting for religious and material rewards, Muawiyah began the process of creating a standing army that could be deployed wherever needed. Soldiers were paid regular salaries, equipped with standardized weapons and armor, and trained in the tactics and technologies that would be needed to conquer and defend the expanding empire. The integration of naval and land forces was another significant innovation of Muawiyah's military system. The Islamic navy that he had created in Syria was expanded and systematized, with naval bases established at strategic points along the Mediterranean coast. The coordination between naval and land forces allowed for amphibious operations that could strike at enemy territories from unexpected directions, while the control of sea lanes ensured that the empire's commercial interests were protected. Muawiyah's religious policies were perhaps the most delicate aspect of his governance. As caliph, he was expected to serve as the religious as well as the political leader of the Islamic community, but his path to power had been marked by conflict with other Muslim leaders who questioned his religious credentials. He addressed this challenge by demonstrating his commitment to Islamic law and practice while avoiding the theological controversies that had divided the early Muslim community. The construction of the first version of the Great Mosque of Damascus began during Muawiyah's reign, though it would not be completed until the time of his successors. The mosque was intended to serve as both a place of worship and a symbol of the Umayyad commitment to Islamic values. Its architectural style blended Arab, Byzantine, and Persian influences, creating a distinctly Islamic aesthetic that would influence mosque design for centuries to come. Muawiyah's approach to religious authority was characterized by pragmatism and tolerance. He consulted with religious scholars and sought to govern according to Islamic principles, but he also recognized that rigid adherence to religious law could sometimes conflict with the practical necessities of governing a diverse empire. His solutions to these dilemmas often involved creative interpretations of Islamic law that satisfied religious requirements while allowing for administrative flexibility. The establishment of the Umayyad dynasty marked a fundamental transformation in the nature of Islamic governance. The first 4 caliphs had been chosen through consultation among the leading members of the Muslim community, but Muawiyah established the principle of hereditary succession by naming his son Yazid as his heir. This decision was controversial and would remain a source of tension throughout the Umayyad period, but it provided the stability and continuity that the empire needed to consolidate its conquests and expand its influence. The soft glow of oil lamps illuminates the palace chambers where Muawiyah conducts the business of empire. The administrative apparatus he has created handles correspondence from governors in Spain and Central Asia, tax assessments from Egypt and Iraq, military reports from the Byzantine and Persian frontiers. The scale of the operation is unprecedented in Islamic history, rivaling the administrative systems of the great empires that the Muslims have conquered. The cultural flowering that would characterize the Umayyad period was already beginning to emerge during Muawiyah's reign. The court in Damascus became a center of intellectual and artistic activity, attracting scholars, poets, and artisans from throughout the Islamic world and beyond. The translation of Greek philosophical and scientific works into Arabic began during this period, laying the foundation for the great intellectual achievements that would follow. The architectural innovations of the Umayyad period reflected the empire's growing confidence and sophistication. The palaces and mosques built during Muawiyah's reign incorporated elements from multiple architectural traditions, creating a distinctly Islamic style that would influence building throughout the Islamic world. The use of geometric patterns, calligraphic decoration, and innovative structural techniques demonstrated the high level of artistic and technical achievement that the Islamic Empire had reached. As Muawiyah's reign progressed, the foundations of the Umayyad system became increasingly solid. The empire's borders were secure, its administration was efficient, its economy was prosperous, and its culture was flourishing. The transformation from a religious movement to a world empire was complete, and the stage was set for the great conquests and cultural achievements that would characterize the reigns of Muawiyah's successors. The night deepens over Damascus, and the sounds of the sleeping city fade into silence. In the palace, the oil lamps burn low, casting dancing shadows on the walls where the future of the Islamic world is being planned. Muawiyah's vision of a unified Islamic empire stretching from the Atlantic to the Indian Ocean is beginning to take shape, and the foundations he has laid will support the greatest expansion of Islamic civilization in history. The whispers of the desert wind carry the promise of conquests yet to come, of cities yet to be built, of cultures yet to be synthesized into the grand tapestry of Islamic civilization. The Umayyad dynasty that Muawiyah has founded will rule for nearly a century, carrying the banner of Islam to the ends of the known world and creating a legacy that will endure long after the last Umayyad Caliph has passed into history. Part 3. The Flowering Conquest, Construction and Commerce. Target. -25,000 characters. The dawn light filtering through the arched windows of the great mosque of Damascus catches the golden tessellé of the magnificent mosaics, each tiny square of glass and stone reflecting the morning sun like captured stars. I stand in the vast prayer hall, surrounded by the architectural masterpiece that represents the zenith of Umayyad artistic achievement. The mosque that rises around me is not the simple structure that Muawiyah knew, but the glorious edifice commissioned by Al-Walid ibn Abd al-Malik in 705, a building that would stand as a testament to the power and sophistication of the Umayyad Caliphate for all eternity. The transformation of this sacred space tells the story of the empire's evolution from a pragmatic political arrangement to a confident expression of Islamic imperial identity. Where once stood the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist, built by the Byzantines from the ruins of a Roman temple of Jupiter, now rises the most magnificent mosque in the Islamic world. The construction required 8 years of intensive labor, employing craftsmen from across the empire and beyond, their diverse skills unified in service of a single magnificent vision. The mosaics that adorn the walls seem to breathe with life in the shifting light. These are not mere decorations but theological statements rendered in precious materials. The artists who created them, Byzantine craftsmen working alongside Islamic designers, have created a visual representation of paradise that speaks to the deepest longings of the human soul. Gardens of impossible beauty stretch across the wall surfaces, their trees heavy with fruit that never spoils, their rivers flowing with waters that never cease, their palaces glowing with light that never dims. The technique required to create these masterpieces represents the pinnacle of medieval artistic achievement. Each tessera, or individual piece of the mosaic, has been cut by hand from glass that was heated with gold leaf to create colors that seem to glow from within. The placement of each piece required not only technical skill but artistic vision, as the mosaicists worked to create effects of light and shadow, depth and movement that would inspire awe in every viewer. The sound of my footsteps echoes through the vast space, a reminder of the acoustic engineering that makes every whisper audible throughout the prayer hall. The architects who designed this space understood that a mosque must serve not only as a place of visual beauty, but as a functional space for communal worship. The placement of the columns, the height of the ceiling, the proportions of the prayer hall, all have been calculated to create optimal conditions for the congregation's spiritual experience. As I walk through the mosque, I am transported in my imagination to the workshops where these marvels were created. The glass furnaces burning day and night, their fires hot enough to melt sand and metal into the raw material of artistic creation. The skilled craftsmen heating rods of glass over flames, drawing them into thin sheets that would be cut into the thousands of tiny pieces needed for the mosaics. The artists sketching their designs on the walls, calculating the placement of each element to create the maximum visual impact. The construction of the Great Mosque coincided with the most dramatic period of Umayyad expansion, when the empire's borders were pushed to their furthest extent in both east and west. The wealth that flowed into Damascus from these conquests funded not only the mosque's construction but the entire program of architectural and artistic development that would make the Umayyad period a golden age of Islamic civilization. The conquest of North Africa, which began in earnest during the reign of Abd al-Malik, was a triumph of military organization and strategic vision. The Berber tribes that had resisted Byzantine and Roman rule for centuries were gradually incorporated into the Islamic Empire through a combination of military pressure and diplomatic negotiation. The key to success lay in the Umayyad understanding that conquest meant not just military victory but cultural and economic integration. I can see in my mind's eye the great expeditions setting out from Damascus, their banners fluttering in the desert wind as they march toward the setting sun. The armies are no longer the tribal raiders of the early Islamic conquests but disciplined professional forces equipped with the latest military technology. Their weapons are forged in the workshops of Damascus, their armor crafted by skilled metalworkers who have learned their trade from the Persian and Byzantine artisans who have joined the Islamic Empire. The logistics of these campaigns required unprecedented organizational skills. Supply lines stretching across thousands of miles of desert had to be maintained, with caravans carrying not only food and water, but the specialized equipment needed for siege warfare. The routes followed ancient trade paths, but the Umayyad military engineers improved them with better roads, more reliable water sources, and fortified way stations that could protect the vulnerable supply trains. The conquest of Africa, as the Arabs called the region that corresponds to modern Tunisia, was completed under the brilliant generalship of Uqba ibn Nafi. His march to the Atlantic coast in 681 became the stuff of legend, as he drove his horse into the surf and declared that only the ocean could stop the advance of Islam. The foundation of Karawah as a military and administrative center provided the Umayyads with a base from which to project their power throughout the Maghreb. The sound of water trickling in the mosque's fountain creates a gentle counterpoint to my thoughts, reminding me of the practical challenges that the Umayyad engineers overcame in their conquests. The desert campaigns required not only military skill but expertise in water management, as armies had to be sustained across vast waterless expanses. The techniques developed for these campaigns, the digging of wells, the construction of cisterns, the careful rationing of water supplies, would later be applied to the irrigation systems that made the Islamic agricultural revolution possible. The integration of the Berber tribes into the Islamic Empire was achieved through a combination of military pressure and cultural accommodation. The Umayyads understood that lasting conquest required not just the defeat of enemy armies, but the creation of new loyalties and identities. Berber leaders who accepted Islam were incorporated into the Islamic administrative system, while Berber soldiers were recruited for the campaigns that would carry Islamic arms even further westward. The conquest of Spain began as an almost accidental byproduct of the North African campaigns. Tariq ibn Ziyad, a Berber commander serving under the Umayyad governor of North Africa, crossed the strait that would later bear his name, Gibraltar, from Jabal Tariq with a force of mostly Berber troops in 711. The Visigothic kingdom of Spain, weakened by internal strife and religious persecution, collapsed with surprising speed before the Islamic advance. The campaigns in Spain reveal the sophisticated intelligence networks that the Umayyads had developed to support their military operations. The invasion was not a blind thrust into unknown territory, but a carefully planned operation based on detailed knowledge of Visigothic weaknesses. Agents had been sent across the strait to establish contact with disaffected elements within the Visigothic kingdom, including the Jewish communities that had suffered under Christian persecution. The Gothic nobles who had fled to the mountains of Asturias would later become the nucleus of the Christian reconquest. But for now, the greater part of the Iberian Peninsula was incorporated into the Islamic Empire. The speed of the conquest was matched by the efficiency of the subsequent administration, as Umayyad governors established their authority over the newly conquered territories and began the process of integration that would create the unique synthesis of Islamic, Christian, and Jewish cultures that would characterize medieval Spain. The wealth that flowed back to Damascus from these conquests was staggering. Gold from Africa, silver from Spain, precious stones from Central Asia, silk from China, all converged on the Umayyad capital, creating a concentration of luxury and refinement that rivaled anything the world had seen. The markets of Damascus became international emporiums where merchants from India and China met traders from Italy and France, their goods changing hands in transactions that spanned continents. The architecture of the Great Mosque reflects this global reach of Umayyad civilization. The columns that support the prayer hall are spolia, recycled architectural elements taken from Roman and Byzantine buildings throughout the empire. Each column tells a story of conquest and integration, of the Umayyad ability to absorb and transform the cultural heritage of their predecessors. The capitals that crown these columns represent a synthesis of classical and Islamic motifs, creating a new architectural vocabulary that would influence building throughout the Islamic world. The minarets that rise above the mosque represent another architectural innovation of the Umayyad period. The square tower form, borrowed from the church architecture of Syria, was adapted for Islamic use and would become the standard form for minarets throughout the Western Islamic world. The height of these towers allowed the call to prayer to be heard throughout the city, but their symbolic significance extended far beyond their practical function. The economic transformation that accompanied the Umayyad conquests was as significant as the military and political changes. The empire's vast territorial extent created opportunities for trade on a scale never before imagined. The Indian Ocean trade routes that had connected Asia with the Mediterranean since ancient times were now largely under Islamic control, allowing Muslim merchants to dominate the most lucrative commercial networks in the world. The standardization of currency throughout the empire facilitated this commercial expansion. The gold dinars and silver dirhams minted in Damascus were accepted from Spain to Central Asia, creating a unified economic space that encouraged trade and investment. The inscriptions on these coins, written in Arabic and proclaiming the unity of God and the prophethood of Muhammad, served as vehicles for spreading Islamic culture, even to regions that had never been conquered by Islamic armies. The urban development that characterized the Umayyad period reflected the empire's growing prosperity and sophistication. Damascus itself was transformed from a provincial Byzantine city into a cosmopolitan imperial capital. New neighborhoods were built to house the growing population, while the old city was renovated with new markets, baths, and public buildings. The palace complex expanded to accommodate the elaborate court ceremonial that had evolved to match the empire's imperial pretensions. The engineering projects undertaken during this period demonstrated the Umayyad commitment to improving the infrastructure of their empire. The ancient Roman aqueduct system that supplied Damascus with water was restored and expanded, while new roads and bridges were built to facilitate communication and trade. The postal system established by Muawiyah was extended throughout the empire, with relay stations providing fresh horses and supplies for the messengers who carried the caliph's orders to the most distant provinces. The textile workshops of Damascus became famous throughout the medieval world for their silk fabrics, which incorporated techniques learned from Persian and Byzantine craftsmen. The patterns woven into these textiles often featured Arabic calligraphy, geometric designs, and stylized animal motifs that reflected the Islamic prohibition against representational art. The export of these luxury textiles to Europe and Asia generated substantial revenues, while spreading awareness of Islamic artistic achievements. The leather workers of Damascus developed new techniques for treating and decorating leather that would influence the craft throughout the Islamic world. The famous Cordovan leather, named after the Spanish city of Córdoba, was actually developed in Damascus and then transmitted to Spain by Umayyad craftsmen. The bookbindings produced in Damascus, with their intricate geometric patterns and calligraphic decoration, became models for Islamic book arts throughout the empire. The metalworkers of Damascus achieved fame for their production of steel weapons and decorative objects. The techniques they developed for creating patterned steel, known in the West as Damascus steel, represented the highest achievement of medieval metallurgy. The process involved the careful manipulation of carbon content and the folding of the metal during forging to create patterns that were both beautiful and functional. The glass industry of Damascus, building on centuries of local tradition, reached new heights of achievement during the Umayyad period. The techniques developed for creating the mosque mosaics were applied to the production of vessels, windows, and decorative objects that were exported throughout the Islamic world and beyond. The colors achieved by Damascus glass workers, particularly the deep blues and brilliant golds, were unmatched anywhere in the medieval world. The agricultural innovations of the Umayyad period laid the foundation for the population growth and urbanization that characterized the Islamic world. The introduction of new crops from India and Central Asia, combined with improved irrigation techniques, increased agricultural productivity throughout the empire. The famous Green Revolution of the Islamic world, which saw the introduction of rice, sugarcane, cotton, and citrus fruits to the Mediterranean region, began during the Umayyad period. The irrigation systems developed for the desert regions of Syria and Iraq became models for agricultural development throughout the Islamic world. The qanats of Persia, the irrigation channels of Spain, and the water wheels of Syria all reflected the Umayyad commitment to maximizing agricultural productivity through technological innovation. The wealth generated by this agricultural revolution provided the foundation for the empire's military and cultural achievements. The trading networks that connected the Islamic Empire with the rest of the world during the Umayyad period were more extensive and sophisticated than anything seen before. Muslim merchants established trading posts from the Atlantic coast of Africa to the ports of China, creating a commercial network that spanned 3 continents. The profits from this trade funded not only the construction of mosques and palaces, but the development of the educational and cultural institutions that would make the Islamic world a center of learning and intellectual achievement. The maritime technology developed during the Umayyad period enabled this commercial expansion. The Islamic Navy, which had begun as a defensive force to protect the empire's Mediterranean territories, evolved into a sophisticated naval force capable of projecting power across vast distances. The development of new ship designs, improved navigation techniques, and better port facilities made it possible for Muslim merchants to compete successfully with their Byzantine and Indian counterparts. The cultural synthesis that characterized the Umayyad period was reflected in the empire's architectural achievements. The mosques built during this period incorporated elements from the diverse architectural traditions of the conquered territories, creating a distinctly Islamic style that would influence building throughout the Islamic world. The Great Mosque of Damascus, with its synthesis of Byzantine, Persian, and Arab elements, became the prototype for mosque design throughout the empire. The decorative arts of the Umayyad period reflected the same synthetic approach. The geometric patterns that adorned buildings, manuscripts, and decorative objects drew on mathematical principles developed by Greek, Persian, and Indian scholars. The calligraphy that transformed Arabic script into a major art form combined aesthetic principles with religious devotion, creating works that were both beautiful and spiritually meaningful. As I stand in the Great Mosque of Damascus, surrounded by the artistic and architectural achievements of the Umayyad period, I am struck by the magnitude of what was accomplished in less than a century. The empire that Muawiyah had founded as a pragmatic solution to the problems of governing a diverse population had evolved into a sophisticated civilization that could compete with the greatest empires of the ancient world. The mosaic gardens that surround me seem to shimmer with the light of achievement, their eternal beauty a fitting monument to the golden age of Islamic civilization. The afternoon light slants through the windows of the mosque, casting long shadows across the prayer hall. In these shadows, I can see the reflection of the empire's future challenges, the administrative difficulties of governing such a vast territory, the religious tensions that would eventually lead to the Abbasid Revolution, the cultural conflicts that would arise as the empire continued to expand and diversify. But for now, in this moment of perfect balance between achievement and aspiration, the Umayyad Empire stands at the height of its power and influence, its borders secure, its culture flourishing, its future bright with promise. Part 4. The Cultural Golden Age Poetry, Art, and Science. Target. -25,000 characters. The evening breeze carries the sound of a lute being played in the palace gardens, its delicate melody weaving through the jasmine-scented air like golden thread through silk. I walk through the corridors of the Umayyad Palace, where the walls themselves seem to breathe with the rhythm of poetry and the whisper of scholarly discourse. This is the time of the great cultural flowering, when the court of Damascus becomes not just a center of political power but a beacon of intellectual and artistic achievement that will influence civilization for centuries to come. In the library of the palace, illuminated by the soft glow of oil lamps, scribes work through the night copying manuscripts in the elegant Kufic script that has become the standard for Arabic calligraphy. The scratch of reed pens on parchment creates a gentle percussion that accompanies the more dramatic sounds of cultural creation. The passionate recitation of poetry, the heated debates of scholars, the quiet conversations of artists discussing their craft. This is the sound of civilization being born, of human creativity reaching new heights of expression and understanding. The transformation of Arabic from a tribal language into the vehicle of high culture and scientific discourse is one of the most remarkable achievements of the Umayyad period. The poets who gather in the palace halls are not merely entertainers but shapers of a new literary tradition that will influence Arabic poetry for 1,000 years. Their verses, polished to perfection through countless recitations, capture not only the beauty of the Arabic language but the complex emotions and experiences of a civilization in its golden age. Al-Akhtal, the Christian poet who has become one of the most celebrated voices at the Umayyad court, stands before the assembled courtiers reciting verses that blend pre-Islamic tribal themes with the sophisticated sensibilities of imperial civilization. His voice rises and falls with the rhythm of the classical Arabic meter, each syllable precisely placed to create maximum emotional impact. The audience listens in rapt attention, their faces reflecting the play of emotions that the poet's words evoke: pride in their imperial achievements, nostalgia for the simpler life of the desert, wonder at the complexity of human experience. The poetry of the Umayyad court is not merely decorative but functional, serving to articulate the values and aspirations of the new Islamic civilization. The panegyrics that praise the caliphs are not empty flattery but sophisticated explorations of the nature of leadership and authority. The love poems that celebrate romantic passion are not frivolous entertainment but profound meditations on the human condition. The elegies that mourn the dead are not simple expressions of grief, but complex philosophical reflections on the meaning of life and death. Farazdak, the great satirist whose cutting wit has made him both feared and beloved, demonstrates the power of poetry to shape public opinion and political discourse. His verses can elevate a minor official to fame or destroy the reputation of a powerful enemy. The caliph himself seeks his approval, understanding that the poet's words will be remembered long after the political events of the day have been forgotten. The relationship between poet and ruler in the Umayyad court is one of mutual dependence. The ruler provides patronage and protection, while the poet provides legitimacy and cultural prestige. The development of Arabic prosody during this period represents one of the most sophisticated achievements in the history of literature. The complex metrical patterns that govern Arabic poetry require not only linguistic skill but mathematical precision. The poets of the Umayyad court have mastered these patterns so completely that they can improvise verses of perfect formal beauty while maintaining the emotional spontaneity that makes poetry powerful. The result is a literary tradition that combines technical virtuosity with emotional authenticity in ways that few other cultures have achieved. The influence of pre-Islamic poetry on the Umayyad literary tradition creates a fascinating tension between the values of the old tribal culture and the requirements of the new imperial civilization. The ancient themes of honor, courage, and loyalty remain central to Arabic poetry, but they are reinterpreted in the context of Islamic values and imperial ambitions. The result is a synthetic tradition that honors the past while embracing the future, creating a sense of cultural continuity that helps to unify the diverse populations of the empire. The majlis, or salon, where poets gather to recite their verses and compete for recognition, becomes a crucial institution in the cultural life of the Umayyad court. These gatherings are not casual entertainments but formal occasions governed by elaborate protocols and traditions. The seating arrangements reflect the social hierarchy of the court, while the order of performance follows rules that balance respect for established masters with opportunities for emerging talent. The discussions that follow each recitation are learned commentaries on the technical and artistic merits of the work, creating a climate of critical engagement that pushes poets to ever higher achievements. The patronage system that supports this cultural flowering is as sophisticated as the art it produces. The caliphs and their officials compete with each other to attract the most talented poets, offering not only financial rewards but social status and political influence. The poets, in turn, develop networks of loyalty and obligation that extend throughout the empire, creating a cultural unity that transcends political boundaries. A poet who achieves fame in Damascus may find his verses being recited in Cordoba or Samarkand, his reputation preceding him wherever he travels. The manuscripts that preserve these poetic achievements are themselves works of art, their pages illuminated with geometric patterns and calligraphic flourishes that transform the written word into visual beauty. The scribes who produce these books are not mere copyists but skilled artists who understand that their work contributes to the total aesthetic experience of the text. The development of Arabic calligraphy during the Umayyad period creates a distinctly Islamic art form that will influence visual culture throughout the Islamic world. The translation movement that begins during the Umayyad period represents another crucial aspect of the cultural flowering. The conquest of territories with rich intellectual traditions has brought the Islamic Empire into contact with Greek philosophy, Persian literature, and Indian science. Rather than simply imposing Arab culture on these conquered populations, the Umayyad caliphs encouraged the translation of important works into Arabic, creating a synthesis of knowledge that will fuel the great intellectual achievements of the following centuries. The House of Wisdom in Damascus, predecessor to the more famous institution in Baghdad, becomes a center for translation and scholarship. Here, Christian, Jewish, and Muslim scholars work together to render the great works of Greek philosophy into Arabic. The process is not merely linguistic but cultural, as the translators must find ways to express concepts that have no direct equivalent in Arabic thought. The result is a new vocabulary of ideas that will enable Arabic to become the language of science and philosophy throughout the medieval world. The medical texts of Galen and Hippocrates, translated into Arabic by Syrian Christian scholars, provide the foundation for the great advances in medical knowledge that will characterize the Islamic world. The mathematical works of Euclid and Ptolemy, rendered into Arabic by scholars who understand both Greek and Islamic mathematical traditions, create new possibilities for scientific research and technological innovation. The philosophical works of Aristotle and Plato, translated by teams of scholars who spend years perfecting their renditions, open new avenues for theological and philosophical inquiry. The astronomical observations conducted at the Umayyad court represent the beginning of the Islamic scientific revolution. The scholars who staff the palace observatory are not merely recording celestial phenomena, but developing new mathematical techniques for predicting planetary movements and calculating the precise times for religious observances. Their work combines practical religious requirements with intellectual curiosity, creating a scientific tradition that will influence astronomical research for centuries. The astrolabe, that most sophisticated of medieval scientific instruments, reaches new levels of perfection in the workshops of Damascus. The craftsmen who create these instruments are not merely skilled metalworkers but learned mathematicians who understand the complex geometrical principles that govern their construction. The result is a tool that enables scholars to solve problems in astronomy, geography, and navigation with unprecedented accuracy. The export of these instruments to scholars throughout the Islamic world and beyond helps to spread the new scientific knowledge that is being developed in the Umayyad capital. The architectural achievements of the Umayyad period are not merely aesthetic but scientific, demonstrating sophisticated understanding of mathematics, engineering, and physics. The dome of the Great Mosque of Damascus, with its complex geometrical structure, represents a solution to engineering problems that had challenged builders for centuries. The acoustic properties of the mosque, which allow the imam's voice to be heard clearly throughout the vast space, demonstrate understanding of principles that will not be formally articulated by European scientists for centuries. The geometric patterns that adorn Umayyad buildings are not merely decorative but mathematical, representing sophisticated understanding of symmetry, proportion, and infinite series. The artists who create these patterns are not merely craftsmen but learned mathematicians who understand the theoretical principles underlying their work. The result is a visual art form that combines aesthetic beauty with intellectual rigor, creating works that appeal to both the eye and the mind. The development of Arabic music during the Umayyad period represents another aspect of the cultural flowering. The court musicians who entertain the caliphs and their guests are not merely performers but theorists who understand the mathematical principles underlying musical harmony. The instruments they play, the lute, the flute, the drum, are refined versions of instruments that have been developed throughout the Islamic world. The musical modes they employ combine Arab, Persian, and Byzantine elements, creating a synthetic tradition that will influence musical development throughout the Islamic world. The singing girls who perform at court gatherings are not merely entertainers but skilled artists who have mastered the complex art of Arabic vocal music. Their performances combine musical excellence with poetic sensitivity, as they must interpret the verses of the great poets while maintaining the technical precision required by the musical tradition. The result is a performative art form that brings together music, poetry, and drama in ways that create profound emotional impact. The development of Arabic historiography during the Umayyad period establishes the foundation for the great historical works that will characterize later Islamic civilization. The court historians who record the achievements of the caliphs are not merely chroniclers but skilled literary artists who understand that history must be both accurate and aesthetically pleasing. Their works combine careful research with narrative sophistication, creating historical literature that will influence historical writing throughout the Islamic world. The biographical tradition that develops during this period creates a new genre of literature that will become central to Islamic culture. The accounts of the lives of the caliphs, the poets, and the scholars are not merely factual records but literary works that explore the complex relationship between individual achievement and historical circumstance. The result is a body of literature that provides both historical information and moral instruction, creating models of behavior that will influence Islamic culture for centuries. The legal scholarship that flourishes during the Umayyad period lays the foundation for the great legal systems that will govern Islamic society. The scholars who interpret Islamic law are not merely jurists but intellectuals who understand that law must be both religiously authentic and practically applicable. Their work combines religious knowledge with rational analysis, creating legal systems that will influence jurisprudence throughout the Islamic world. The theological debates that characterize the Umayyad period create the intellectual framework for later Islamic theology. The scholars who explore questions of divine justice, human free will, and the nature of the Quran are not merely religious thinkers but philosophers who understand that theology must engage with the sophisticated philosophical traditions of the ancient world. Their work combines religious devotion with intellectual rigor, creating theological systems that will influence Islamic thought for centuries. The educational institutions that developed during the Umayyad period established the foundation for the great centers of learning that will characterize later Islamic civilization. The madrasas that are established in Damascus and other major cities are not merely schools but centers of intellectual life that bring together scholars from throughout the Islamic world. The curriculum they develop combines religious instruction with training in logic, mathematics, and natural science, creating an educational system that will influence learning throughout the Islamic world. The libraries that are established during this period become centers of scholarly activity that attract researchers from throughout the known world. The collection of manuscripts in these libraries represents not merely the accumulation of books, but the creation of intellectual resources that will fuel scientific and literary achievement for centuries. The cataloging systems that are developed to organize these collections demonstrate sophisticated understanding of the principles of information organization and retrieval. The gardens of the Umayyad palaces are not merely aesthetic creations but scientific laboratories where botanists experiment with new plants and agricultural techniques. The hydraulic systems that water these gardens demonstrate sophisticated understanding of engineering principles, while the selection and arrangement of plants reflect knowledge of botany, climate, and horticulture. The result is a synthetic art form that combines aesthetic beauty with scientific knowledge, creating environments that stimulate both the senses and the intellect. The textile workshops of Damascus become centers of technological innovation as well as artistic creation. The techniques developed for dyeing, weaving, and finishing silk create new possibilities for artistic expression while generating substantial economic returns. The export of these textiles to Europe and Asia not only spreads awareness of Islamic artistic achievement but provides the financial resources that support the empire's cultural activities. The perfume industry that develops during the Umayyad period represents another synthesis of art and science. The techniques developed for extracting and blending fragrances require sophisticated understanding of chemistry, while the final products reflect refined aesthetic sensibilities. The export of these perfumes to markets throughout the known world helps to spread awareness of Islamic cultural achievement while providing economic benefits to the empire. As the night deepens around the palace, the sounds of cultural creation continue. In the libraries, scholars debate the meaning of ancient texts. In the workshops, artists create objects of unprecedented beauty. In the gardens, poets compose verses that will be remembered for centuries. The Umayyad court has become not merely a center of political power but a crucible of human creativity, where the achievements of the past are preserved and transformed into the foundations of future civilization. The oil lamps burn low, casting flickering shadows on the walls where tomorrow's masterpieces are being planned. The whispers of scholars, the scratch of pens, the gentle rustle of turning pages. These are the sounds of civilization at its peak, when human creativity reaches heights that will inspire and instruct future generations. The cultural achievements of the Umayyad period will outlive the political power that created them, their influence extending far beyond the boundaries of the empire to touch civilizations that have yet to be born. The jasmine blooms in the palace gardens, its fragrance mixing with the scent of parchment and ink, creating an atmosphere that speaks of intellectual and artistic achievement. This is the golden age of Islamic civilization, when the synthesis of Arab, Persian, Byzantine, and other cultural traditions creates new possibilities for human expression and understanding. The legacy of this achievement will endure long after the last Umayyad Caliph has passed into history, its influence shaping the development of human civilization for centuries to come. Part 5. Desert Palaces and Court Life. Target. -25,000 characters. The morning sun rises over the endless expanse of the Syrian desert, its golden light illuminating the limestone walls of Qusayr Amra, the most intimate and mysterious of the Umayyad desert palaces. I stand in the central hall of this remarkable structure, surrounded by frescoes that seem to glow with their own inner fire, their colors as vivid today as they were when the artist's brush first touched the plaster 12 centuries ago. The silence of the desert is profound, broken only by the whisper of wind through the arched windows and the distant call of a hawk circling in the cloudless sky. This is where the Umayyad caliphs came to escape the formalities of court life in Damascus, to rediscover their connection to the desert that had shaped their ancestors' souls. The palace is not grand in the manner of the urban residences. It is intimate, almost personal, a place where the ruler could shed the ceremonial robes of empire and remember what it meant to be an Arab prince in the vast spaces of the desert. The walls around me tell stories that were never meant for public consumption, private moments of pleasure and reflection that reveal the human side of imperial power. The frescoes that adorn every surface of the palace are a revelation of Umayyad artistic achievement. Here, freed from the religious constraints that governed public art, the painters have created a world of sensual beauty that speaks to the deepest human desires. The central dome above my head displays a map of the heavens, with constellations depicted not as abstract symbols but as living figures, hunters and animals, musicians and dancers, all frozen in eternal motion across the star-filled sky. The astronomical accuracy of this celestial map demonstrates the sophisticated scientific knowledge of the Umayyad court, while its artistic beauty reveals the aesthetic sensibilities of a civilization at its cultural peak. The walls of the audience hall are covered with paintings that seem to breathe with life. Here, the 6 great rulers of the age, the Byzantine emperor, the Persian Shah, the Visigothic king, the Negus of Abyssinia, the emperor of China, and the caliph himself, are depicted in a procession that celebrates the Umayyad claim to world dominion. The faces of these rulers, painted with remarkable psychological insight, reveal the complex emotions of power, confidence and anxiety, triumph and burden, the weight of responsibility that comes with supreme authority. The bathing complex that forms the heart of the palace represents the synthesis of Roman engineering with Islamic aesthetic sensibilities. The hot room, with its domed ceiling and marble floors, creates an environment of luxurious comfort that rivals anything built in the great cities of the empire. The hypocaust system that heats the rooms demonstrates the continuity of Roman technological traditions, while the geometric patterns that decorate the walls reveal the distinctly Islamic approach to architectural ornament. The changing room of the bathhouse contains perhaps the most remarkable frescoes in the palace, scenes of daily life that provide an intimate glimpse into the private world of the Umayyad elite. Musicians play their instruments while dancers move to rhythms that seem to pulse through the very walls. Hunters prepare for the chase, their falcons perched on gloved hands, their horses stamping impatiently in the morning air. Children play games that their descendants will play centuries later, their laughter echoing through time to remind us of the continuity of human experience. The erotic art that decorates certain chambers of the palace speaks to the Umayyad understanding of human nature in all its complexity. These paintings, executed with the same technical skill and artistic sensitivity as the more formal works, celebrate the physical aspects of human love without shame or concealment. The figures are rendered with remarkable anatomical accuracy, their bodies moving with grace and passion that speaks to the artist's deep understanding of human emotion and desire. The desert palace serves not only as a retreat but as a center for the elaborate hunting expeditions that were central to Umayyad court life. The stables attached to the palace could house dozens of horses, while the kennels provided accommodation for the hunting dogs that were essential for the pursuit of gazelle and other desert game. The falconry mews, with their carefully controlled environment, housed the precious birds of prey that were the most prized possessions of the Umayyad nobility. The hunting expeditions that departed from these desert palaces were elaborate affairs that combined recreation with diplomacy and military training. The caliph and his companions would ride out into the desert before dawn, their horses stepping carefully through the cooling sand while the first light of day painted the dunes in shades of gold and rose. The sound of hoofbeats muffled by the sand, the jingle of harness and the soft conversation of riders anticipating the pleasures of the hunt. These were the sounds of the desert awakening to another day of aristocratic leisure. The organization of these hunting parties required the same logistical expertise that governed military campaigns. Supply trains carrying water, food, and equipment would precede the hunting party to establish camps at predetermined locations. The camps themselves were marvels of portable luxury: silk pavilions that could be erected in minutes, carpets that transformed the desert sand into comfortable living spaces, portable kitchens that could prepare elaborate meals in the most remote locations. The falconry that was practiced by the Umayyad elite represented both an art and a science. The training of a hunting falcon required months of patient work, as the bird had to learn to trust its human handler while maintaining its natural hunting instincts. The relationship between falconer and falcon was one of mutual respect and understanding, a partnership that exemplified the Umayyad ideal of harmony between human civilization and the natural world. The hawks and falcons used in these expeditions were not merely hunting tools but symbols of status and refinement. The most prized birds were gifts exchanged between rulers, their value measured not only in monetary terms but in the diplomatic significance of the gesture. A perfectly trained gerfalcon might be worth more than a skilled craftsman's annual wages, while a gift of rare hunting birds could seal an alliance or demonstrate the sender's respect for the recipient. The poetry that was composed during these hunting expeditions captured the exhilaration of the chase and the beauty of the desert landscape. The court poets who accompanied the hunting parties were expected to commemorate the day's adventures in verses that would be recited at evening gatherings around the campfire. These poems, with their vivid descriptions of racing horses and soaring falcons, became an integral part of the Arabic literary tradition, their influence extending far beyond the immediate context of the hunt. The evening entertainment at the desert camps represented the pinnacle of Umayyad court culture. As the sun set over the endless dunes, the hunting party would gather around fires that cast dancing shadows on the silk walls of the pavilions. The air would be filled with the scent of roasting meat and the sound of lutes and flutes, creating an atmosphere of sophisticated pleasure that demonstrated the cultural achievements of the Islamic Empire. The feasts that followed successful hunting expeditions were elaborate affairs that showcased the culinary arts of the Umayyad court. The game that had been taken during the day would be prepared according to recipes that combined Arab, Persian, and Byzantine culinary traditions. The bread was baked in portable ovens, the fruits and vegetables were brought from the irrigated gardens of Damascus, and the wine, despite religious prohibitions, flowed freely among the Christian and Jewish members of the court. The after-dinner entertainment at these gatherings included poetry recitations, musical performances, and intellectual discussions that could continue deep into the night. The caliph himself might participate in poetic competitions, demonstrating his mastery of the Arabic language and his appreciation for the literary arts. The conversations that took place around these desert campfires often influenced imperial policy, as the informal atmosphere encouraged frank discussion of political and administrative issues. The return journey to Damascus from these hunting expeditions provided opportunities for the caliph to observe the condition of his empire at ground level. The party would stop at villages and towns along the route, allowing the ruler to hear petitions from his subjects and to assess the effectiveness of his provincial administration. These informal encounters often provided more valuable information than formal reports from governors and administrators. The other desert palaces of the Umayyad period, Khirbet al-Mafjar, Qasr al-Hair al-Garbi, Mush'ada, each reflected different aspects of the dynasty's relationship with the desert environment. Some were elaborate residential complexes that could accommodate the entire court for extended periods, while others were simple hunting lodges designed for brief retreats from the pressures of urban life. All shared the common characteristic of demonstrating the Umayyad ability to create luxury and comfort in even the most challenging environments. The agricultural installations associated with these palaces represented remarkable achievements in desert engineering. The irrigation systems that brought water from distant springs and rivers required sophisticated understanding of hydraulics and surveying. The gardens that bloomed in the desert around these palaces were not merely ornamental but practical, producing the fruits and vegetables that sustained the court during its desert sojourns. The bath houses that were integral features of these desert palaces demonstrate the Umayyad commitment to personal hygiene and physical comfort. The elaborate heating systems, the multiple pools at different temperatures, the massage rooms and relaxation chambers, all reflected the influence of Roman and Byzantine bathing traditions adapted to Islamic sensibilities. The decoration of these spaces with geometric patterns and calligraphic inscriptions created environments that were both luxurious and spiritually uplifting. The private quarters of the desert palaces reveal the domestic life of the Umayyad elite in unprecedented detail. The bedrooms, with their painted walls and comfortable furnishings, demonstrate the sophisticated lifestyle that the dynasty had developed. The women's quarters, while segregated from the public areas of the palace, were no less luxurious, with their own gardens, bathhouses, and entertainment spaces. The libraries and study chambers found in some of the desert palaces indicate that these retreats were not merely places of leisure but centers of learning and intellectual activity. The caliph and his companions would bring books and manuscripts to the desert, using the quiet environment to pursue scholarly interests that might be difficult to accommodate in the busy atmosphere of the urban court. The workshops associated with the desert palaces produced luxury goods that were used both by the court and as diplomatic gifts. The skilled craftsmen who worked in these remote locations were often specialists in particular techniques: metalworkers who created intricate bronze and silver objects, textile workers who produced silk fabrics of exceptional quality, jewelers who set precious stones in gold and silver settings. The stables and kennels of the desert palaces housed some of the finest horses and hunting dogs in the Islamic world. The breeding programs that were conducted at these facilities produced animals that were prized throughout the Mediterranean region. The export of these animals generated substantial revenues while spreading awareness of Umayyad cultural achievements. The security arrangements for the desert palaces required careful planning and substantial resources. The remote locations that made these retreats attractive also made them vulnerable to attack from Bedouin raiders or rival political factions. The walls and towers that protected the palaces were designed to withstand siege, while the wells and storage facilities within the compounds could sustain the inhabitants during extended periods of isolation. The religious facilities in the desert palaces reflect the Umayyad approach to Islamic practice. The mosques and prayer halls were designed to accommodate the ritual requirements of Islam while adapting to the special conditions of desert life. The mihrab that indicated the direction of prayer toward Mecca was often decorated with particular richness, while the minaret that called the faithful to prayer served also as a watchtower for the palace guards. The seasonal rhythm of court life involved regular migrations between the urban palaces of Damascus and the desert retreats. The timing of these movements was carefully planned to take advantage of favorable weather conditions and to accommodate the administrative requirements of the empire. The winter months might be spent in the desert, enjoying the mild temperatures and clear skies, while the summer would bring the court back to Damascus with its gardens and fountains. The transportation required for these movements involved elaborate logistical planning. The personal possessions of the caliph and his court, clothing, books, artistic objects, musical instruments, had to be carefully packed and protected during the journey. The animals that traveled with the court, horses, camels, hunting dogs, and falcons, required special care and attention. The servants and guards who accompanied the royal party needed their own provisions and equipment. The impact of these desert palaces on the development of Islamic architecture was profound and lasting. The techniques developed for creating comfortable living spaces in harsh environments influenced building throughout the Islamic world. The decorative schemes that were perfected in these intimate settings provided models for larger architectural projects. The integration of indoor and outdoor spaces that characterized these palaces became a defining feature of Islamic residential architecture. The legacy of the Umayyad desert palaces extends far beyond their architectural and artistic achievements. They represent a unique synthesis of nomadic and settled lifestyles, a way of life that honored the desert heritage of the Arab people while embracing the luxury and sophistication of imperial civilization. The frescoes and mosaics that decorate these palaces provide invaluable insights into the daily life, beliefs, and aspirations of the Umayyad elite. While the architectural innovations they represent continue to influence designers and builders today, the silence of the desert around Qusayr Amra is broken only by the whisper of wind through the ancient stones. As I prepare to leave this remarkable place, I am struck by the intimate nature of the artistic and architectural achievements it represents. Unlike the grand public monuments of Damascus, these desert palaces were created for private enjoyment, expressions of personal taste and individual sensibility that reveal the human side of imperial power. The frescoes that surround me seem to pulse with life in the changing light of the desert sun. The figures of kings and courtiers, musicians and dancers, hunters and lovers, all speak to the universal human experiences that transcend the boundaries of time and culture. The Umayyad Caliphs who commissioned these works understood that true civilization must provide not only for the material needs of its people, but for their spiritual and aesthetic aspirations as well. The desert wind carries the scent of wild herbs and the distant promise of rain, reminders of the natural world that the Umayyad palaces were designed to complement rather than dominate. The harmony between human architecture and natural environment that these buildings achieve represents one of the highest accomplishments of Islamic civilization, a synthesis that continues to inspire architects and designers today. As the sun climbs higher in the desert sky, the shadows in the palace grow shorter and the colors of the frescoes more intense. The ancient stones radiate heat that speaks of countless summers, while the geometric patterns that decorate the walls create optical effects that seem to shift and change with the viewer's movement. This is architecture as poetry, building as an expression of the human soul, a testament to the creative genius of a civilization that understood the deep connection between physical beauty and spiritual fulfillment. Part 6. The End of a Dynasty, the Abbasid Revolution, target, -25,000 characters. The evening shadows lengthen across the courtyard of the great mosque of Damascus, and I can feel the weight of approaching darkness. Not just the natural darkness of nightfall, but the historical darkness that will soon engulf the Umayyad dynasty. The year is 750, and the empire that has ruled the Islamic world for nearly a century stands on the brink of collapse. The whispers that echo through the mosque's corridors speak not of poetry and philosophy, but of rebellion and revolution, of armies marching from the east under banners black as the night sky. The signs of decline have been accumulating for decades, subtle at first, then increasingly obvious to those who know how to read the political winds. The great expansion that characterized the early Umayyad period has slowed and then stopped, the empire's borders stabilizing as the costs of further conquest begin to outweigh the benefits. The religious tensions that Muawiyah had so skillfully managed have intensified, with various factions questioning the legitimacy of Umayyad rule and demanding a return to what they consider the pure Islam of the Prophet's time. The Caliph Marwan II, the last of the Umayyad rulers, paces through the palace halls that once echoed with the confident voices of his predecessors. His footsteps on the marble floors create a hollow sound that seems to speak of emptiness and loss. The walls that once displayed the artistic achievements of the dynasty now seem to mock him with their frozen beauty, their geometric patterns appearing to shift and dissolve in the flickering lamplight like the empire itself. The economic foundations of Umayyad power have been slowly eroding for years. The gold that once flowed from the African mines has decreased as the easily accessible deposits have been exhausted. The tribute from distant provinces has become increasingly difficult to collect as local governors assert their independence and rebel against central authority. The trade routes that once carried luxury goods from Asia to Europe have been disrupted by political instability and the rise of competing commercial networks. The social tensions that have long simmered beneath the surface of Umayyad rule have now burst into open conflict. The Arab tribal aristocracy that formed the backbone of the early empire has become increasingly divorced from the diverse populations they govern. The Mawali, the non-Arab converts to Islam, have grown restless under a system that promises spiritual equality but maintains social and economic discrimination. The Persian population, in particular, has begun to assert its cultural identity and demand greater representation in the imperial administration. The religious opposition to Umayyad rule has found its focus in the Abbasid family, descendants of Abbas ibn Abd al-Muttalib, the Prophet Muhammad's uncle. From their base in Khorasan, in the far eastern reaches of the empire, they have begun to organize a revolutionary movement that combines religious legitimacy with political ambition. Their black banners, displayed in deliberate contrast to the white banners of the Umayyads, have become symbols of hope for those who seek change and renewal in the Islamic world. The Abbasid propaganda machine, more sophisticated than anything the medieval world has seen, spreads its message through a network of agents and sympathizers who operate in the shadows of the empire. Their message is carefully crafted to appeal to different audiences: religious purity for the pious, social justice for the oppressed, cultural authenticity for the Persian and other non-Arab populations. The result is a coalition of diverse interests united by their opposition to Umayyad rule. Abu Muslim, the brilliant military commander who leads the Abbasid forces, has transformed the traditional Arab army into a disciplined fighting force that combines the mobility of nomadic warriors with the tactical sophistication of settled peoples. His troops, drawn primarily from the Persian and Turkic populations of Central Asia, fight with the fervor of religious converts and the skill of professional soldiers. Their black banners have become a terror to Umayyad forces, who have learned to fear the sound of their approaching drums. The revolution begins in earnest in 747, when Abu Muslim raises the black banner of the Abbasids in the town of Merv. The response is immediate and overwhelming, as thousands of volunteers flock to join the revolutionary army. The Umayyad governors in the eastern provinces, caught off guard by the speed and scale of the uprising, find themselves isolated and outnumbered. One by one, the great cities of Khorasan fall to the Abbasid forces, their populations celebrating the end of Umayyad rule with enthusiasm that speaks to the depth of their dissatisfaction. The news of the eastern revolts reaches Damascus like a cold wind across the desert, chilling the hearts of the Umayyad court with the realization that their empire faces its greatest crisis. The caliph summons his generals and advisors, but the confident voices that once filled the palace halls are now replaced by worried whispers and uncertain counsel. The imperial apparatus that once seemed so powerful and efficient reveals its weaknesses under pressure, as corruption and incompetence undermine the government's ability to respond effectively to the crisis. The Abbasid armies advance westward with methodical precision, their disciplined ranks cutting through the disorganized resistance of the Umayyad forces like a sword through silk. The black banners that flutter above their columns speak of determination and religious conviction, while the white banners of the Umayyads seem to waver and fade in the face of superior organization and morale. The provincial populations, long oppressed by Umayyad taxation and administration, often welcome the approaching revolutionaries as liberators. The decisive moment comes at the Battle of the Zab in 750, when the main Umayyad army under Marwan II meets the Abbasid forces under Abu Muslim on the banks of the Great Zab River in northern Iraq. The battle is fought on a rain-soaked plain where the thunder of cavalry charges mixes with the clash of steel and the cries of wounded men. The Umayyad forces, despite their experience and training, are overwhelmed by the superior numbers and religious fervor of their opponents. The collapse of the Umayyad army at the Zab is complete and devastating. Marwan II, the last Umayyad caliph, flees westward with the remnants of his forces, his dreams of imperial restoration shattered by the reality of military defeat. The black banners of the Abbasids advance triumphantly across the battlefield, their victory assured by the divine blessing that their supporters believe accompanies their cause. The aftermath of the battle is swift and brutal. The Abbasid forces, driven by religious conviction and political necessity, hunt down the surviving members of the Umayyad family with relentless efficiency. The palaces of Damascus, once filled with the sounds of poetry and music, now echo with the footsteps of soldiers and the cries of victims. The artistic treasures that adorned the walls are torn down or destroyed, their beauty sacrificed to the demands of revolutionary purity. The massacre of the Umayyad family at a supposed reconciliation banquet demonstrates the ruthless pragmatism of the Abbasid revolution. The invitation to negotiate, extended under the traditional protection of hospitality, becomes a trap that eliminates the dynasty's leadership in a single stroke. The bodies of the princes and nobles who had ruled the Islamic world for nearly a century are left to rot in the ruins of their ancestral palace, their blood soaking into the marble floors that had once reflected the glory of their empire. Only Abd al-Rahman, a young Umayyad prince, escapes the massacre through a combination of courage and good fortune. His flight across the desert, pursued by Abbasid agents, becomes an epic journey that will eventually lead him to Spain, where he will establish the last Umayyad dynasty and create a new center of Islamic civilization. His escape ensures that the Umayyad legacy will survive, but in a form far removed from the imperial grandeur of Damascus. The transformation of Damascus from imperial capital to provincial city occurs with shocking speed. The Abbasid caliph Abu al-Abbas, who takes the title al-Safa, the shedder of blood, moves his capital eastward to Iraq, where he will eventually found the new city of Baghdad. The administrative apparatus that had governed the empire from Damascus is dismantled and relocated, leaving behind empty buildings and abandoned dreams. The Great Mosque of Damascus, which had stood as the architectural embodiment of Umayyad power and piety, survives the revolution but loses its central role in Islamic civilization. The mosaics that had proclaimed the glory of the dynasty now seem like relics of a vanished age, their golden taselli catching the light of oil lamps that burn with diminished intensity. The calligraphic inscriptions that had celebrated Umayyad achievements are left unchanged, but their meaning is transformed by the new political reality. The cultural achievements of the Umayyad period suffer a similar fate. The libraries that had preserved the works of classical antiquity are scattered or destroyed, their manuscripts falling victim to the revolutionary zeal that sees them as symbols of the old order. The poets and scholars who had flourished under Umayyad patronage find themselves without protection or support, their artistic achievements dismissed as the frivolous products of a corrupt regime. The economic networks that had sustained the Umayyad Empire are disrupted by the political changes that follow the revolution. The trade routes that had carried goods from Asia to Europe are reorganized to serve the interests of the new Abbasid capital, while the industries that had made Damascus famous for their products declined for lack of investment and support. The skilled craftsmen who had created the artistic treasures of the Umayyad period emigrate to other centers or abandon their trades altogether. The religious transformation that accompanies the Abbasid revolution is equally dramatic. The pragmatic approach to Islamic law that had characterized Umayyad rule is replaced by a more rigid orthodoxy that claims to represent the pure teachings of the Prophet. The theological debates that had flourished in the scholarly circles of Damascus are suppressed or redirected to serve the ideological needs of the new regime. The synthesis of Islamic and pre-Islamic traditions that had characterized Umayyad culture is rejected in favor of a more exclusive definition of Islamic identity. The desert palaces that had provided retreat and recreation for the Umayyad caliphs are abandoned to the elements, their frescoes and mosaics slowly deteriorating under the harsh conditions of the desert climate. The hunting expeditions that had once brought the court together in celebration of aristocratic leisure are replaced by military campaigns aimed at consolidating Abbasid control over the empire. The poetry that had commemorated these peaceful pleasures is forgotten in favor of verses that praise the revolutionary achievements of the new dynasty. The international ramifications of the Umayyad collapse are felt throughout the medieval world. The Byzantine Empire, which had fought against the Umayyads for nearly a century, finds itself facing a new and potentially more dangerous opponent in the Abbasids. The European kingdoms that had begun to establish trade relationships with the Islamic world must adapt to new political realities and different commercial arrangements. The cultural exchange that had enriched both Islamic and Christian civilizations during the Umayyad period is disrupted by the political chaos that follows the revolution. The speed of the Umayyad collapse raises profound questions about the nature of political power and historical change. The dynasty that had seemed so secure and permanent had been destroyed in less than 3 years, its achievements swept away by forces that had been building in the shadows for decades. The palace halls that had once echoed with confident voices now stand silent, their emptiness a reminder of the fragility of human institutions and the unpredictability of historical change. The cyclical nature of history, so clearly illustrated by the rise and fall of the Umayyad dynasty, speaks to fundamental patterns in human civilization. The energy and vision that had built the empire had gradually dissipated, replaced by complacency and corruption that made the dynasty vulnerable to more dynamic forces. The Abbasids, who had begun as rebels and revolutionaries, would eventually face the same challenges that had destroyed their predecessors, as the wheel of history continued its inexorable turn. The lessons of the Umayyad collapse extend beyond the immediate political circumstances of 8th century Islam. The dynasty's failure to adapt to changing conditions, its inability to maintain the loyalty of diverse populations, and its neglect of the spiritual and cultural foundations of its authority all speak to universal challenges that face political leaders in every age. The artistic and intellectual achievements of the Umayyad period, which had seemed so secure and permanent, proved to be as fragile as the political power that had created them. The cultural legacy of the Umayyad period, however, proved more durable than the political structures that had supported it. The architectural innovations that had been developed in Damascus and the desert palaces influenced building throughout the Islamic world for centuries. The artistic techniques that had been perfected in Umayyad workshops were carried to new centers by emigrating craftsmen. The literary traditions that had flourished under Umayyad patronage continued to evolve and develop under new dynasties. The preservation of classical learning that had begun under the Umayyads was continued and expanded by their successors, ensuring that the intellectual heritage of the ancient world would survive the political upheavals of the medieval period. The translation movement that had started in Damascus reached its full flowering in Abbasid Baghdad, where scholars from diverse backgrounds collaborated to create new syntheses of human knowledge. The scientific and philosophical achievements of the Islamic world, which reached their peak under the Abbasids, were built on foundations that had been laid during the Umayyad period. The religious developments that had characterized the Umayyad period also proved to have lasting significance. The legal and theological innovations that had been developed to meet the challenges of governing a diverse empire became permanent features of Islamic civilization. The architectural forms that had been created for the Great Mosque of Damascus provided models for mosque design throughout the Islamic world. The artistic traditions that had been established in Umayyad workshops continued to influence Islamic art for centuries. As I stand in the gathering darkness of the Great Mosque of Damascus, I am struck by the poignancy of historical change and the persistence of human creativity. The empire that had created this magnificent building has vanished, its political power scattered like dust in the desert wind. The caliphs who had commissioned these mosaics and supervised their creation have been dead for more than a millennium, their names remembered only in the histories that record their achievements and failures. Yet the beauty that they created endures, speaking across the centuries to remind us of the human capacity for artistic achievement and spiritual aspiration. The geometric patterns that adorn the walls continue to create their optical effects. The calligraphic inscriptions still proclaim their messages of faith and devotion, and the architectural spaces still provide settings for prayer and contemplation. The physical structures may be aging and the political circumstances may have changed, but the essential human experiences that these buildings were designed to accommodate remain constant. The night air carries the scent of jasmine from the gardens outside the mosque, a reminder of the continuity that underlies the apparent changes of history. The same flowers that bloomed in the palace gardens of the Umayyad Caliphs continue to fill the Damascus nights with their fragrance, their beauty unaffected by the political upheavals that have transformed the city around them. The same stars that shone down on the desert palaces of Qusair, Amra, and Khurbat al-Mafjar continue to illuminate the Syrian sky, their light a constant presence in a world of constant change. The whispers of the desert wind that once carried the voices of Arab poets and the sounds of hunting expeditions now carry only the memories of a vanished age. The silence that fills the empty palace halls speaks of the impermanence of human institutions and the inevitability of change. The dust that settles on the abandoned frescoes of the desert palaces reminds us that even the most beautiful human creations are subject to the passage of time and the erosion of the elements. Yet in this impermanence lies a kind of beauty, a poignancy that speaks to the deepest human experiences of loss and renewal, of achievement and failure, of the eternal cycle of creation and destruction that governs all existence. The Umayyad dynasty, which had seemed so powerful and permanent, had been swept away by forces that had been building for decades in the shadows of the empire. The Abbasids, who had triumphed so completely over their predecessors, would eventually face the same challenges and suffer the same fate, as the wheel of history continued its inexorable turn. The lamp flames flicker in the night breeze, casting dancing shadows on the walls of the mosque that seemed to move with the rhythm of historical change. The mosaics that had proclaimed the glory of the Umayyad dynasty now serve as silent witnesses to the passage of time and the transformation of civilizations. The golden tesseli that had once caught the light of triumph now reflect the more subdued illumination of memory and meditation, their beauty undiminished by the political changes that have surrounded them. The story of the Umayyad Caliphate, like all historical narratives, is ultimately a story about the human condition, our capacity for greatness and our susceptibility to failure, our ability to create beauty and our tendency to destroy it, our aspiration to permanence and our subjection to change. The dynasty that had ruled the Islamic world for nearly a century had left behind a legacy of achievement and failure, of beauty and destruction, of dreams fulfilled and hopes disappointed. The whispers from the Desert Caliphate continue to echo through the centuries, carrying messages of both warning and inspiration to those who would listen. The achievements of the Umayyad period remind us of the heights that human civilization can reach when creativity and power are combined in service of a unifying vision. The failures of the dynasty serve as reminders of the dangers of complacency and the importance of maintaining the spiritual and cultural foundations of political authority. The silence that now fills the halls of the great mosque of Damascus is not empty but full, pregnant with the memories of 1,000 years of human striving and achievement. The stones remember everything, even when the living have forgotten, and in their memory lies the key to understanding both the past and the future, both the achievements and the failures that define the human experience. The desert wind continues to blow, carrying the whispers of the caliphate across the endless sands, a reminder that while empires may fall and dynasties may perish, the human spirit and its capacity for creation endure forever.